artists, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Margot and I'm a professional artist and illustrator. And in today's video, I'm going to teach you how to create these beautiful ranunculus ballet dancers. This is something that is out of my Waltz of the Flowers collection, which I launched this spring, which has been amazing. The feedback was so amazing on Instagram, and I've sold a lot of products with this kind of floral meets dancer kind of motif. So I wanted to teach you how to do something just like that with these particular flowers. And ranunculus are really gorgeous rose-like flowers that are very bundled and delicate. And I think they lend themselves so well to this theme and concept. So if you're interested in learning how to make one of your own, then keep watching because we'll dive right in. Okay, so I'm going to start sketching first, and I'm going to be doing this on Legion's Aqua cold press paper. And the first thing I'm going to do is block off the major compositional elements of my painting. So instead of going in and doing the detail work or actually drawing the petals of the flowers, I'm going to be just blocking off big circles and stems. And by doing this, it's kind of like an outline so that I'm happy with what the composition looks like before I go into the drawing and make all the details. So I want to be sure that from a bird's eye view, I'm happy with the overall location of my flowers, and just doing circles like this will, block off where I see those elements coming into play. So they kind of look like popsicles or lollipops right now, but this is a great way to save yourself some time and just be more efficient when you're planning your composition. So now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to start adding the body starting in the center of the first circle, or the largest circle that I created. And just like for the outlines of the flowers, I'm just doing a stick figure. So that will allow me to very quickly and efficiently make changes. Like, I'm not super happy with how these arms look, so I'm going to just erase them. It'll take 2 seconds and draw another set of arms, facing in a different direction that I'm happier with. And as the drawing becomes more and more final, then I can start adding those details in. And so we go from like a more blocked off and stick figure or simplified geometric shape type drawing to gradually more and more detailed. And that way, like I said, you're not wasting any time with spending 20 minutes on drawing the facial features or even the fingers or something like that, and then coming back later and saying, oh my goodness, I am not happy with this composition at all, and having to start all over again. So I'm reworking this drawing as I'm going along. And as far as the body's concerned, I've broken it down into very basic shapes. So generally speaking, we have a triangular trapezoid shape for the torso, a circle for the head, and just, straight lines or curvy lines for the arms. So we've really just broken it down to the most basic shapes. And I actually have a dedicated video all about drawing the human figure. So if you want more details, because I'm kind of rushing through this, you can check that out. And I'm going to put a link in the description below where you can check that out. All right, so we have our basic skeleton or basic bones of this sketch. I'm going to add some leaves at the bottom, some curvy lines that, are going to translate into some leaves later on for these ranunculus flowers. So the next step before we start painting, and this is what I recommend doing for all of you guys, is to take a kneaded eraser, or just about any eraser, and lightly erase your pencil lines. I know that sounds completely counterintuitive, but what we want is to remove as much of the lead buildup on the paper, because once we apply watercolor onto the paper, then that will the pencil will muddy up our colors a little bit. So what we really want is for the lines to be as faint as possible. So we still want them to be there, we still want to see them, but we want them to be as faint as possible so that they're not interfering with the brightness and the vividness of our colors. So I just take it and I just use my kneaded eraser like a sponge on the surface of the paper, just patting down and lifting off any excess lead from that paper. This looks pretty good, so I'm going to reach for my brush and we can start painting now. For my skin tones, I'm going to start with the palest colors on the painting first, because it's usually easier to go from paler colors to darker and darker as you go with watercolors. So I've taken some permanent red and some burnt sienna, so red and brown essentially, and I'm going to water them down and dilute this color to be very pale. And that's going to give me a peachy kind of skin tone. And depending on, what skin tone you want to give your figures, They can either be more brown, or you can add a little bit of orange or yellow to warm them up a little bit. So you can play a little bit with this depending on, the actual tones you want to get in your skin tone. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to very lightly with the tip of my brush, and I have a number 8 round brush from Princeton Aqua Elite. But any round brush will do. And with the tip of my brush, I'm just going to go over the areas that I blocked in. So again, we're keeping it very simple with our stick figure, but allowing the paintbrush to give a little bit more volume. So instead of being, just a simple stick, you'll see that the arms are a little bit thicker. And for the hand, I'm just creating a little tab where the thumb would be. So that just gives you a little hint that there's going to be a thumb there. And I'm going to repeat this for all of my figures. And just notice that wherever the clothes are going to start on these figures, I left that blank for now because I'm going to change the color there and use a different color. So I don't necessarily want the skin tones to be mixing with the colors that I add on top. So wherever you want your clothes to be, you would just leave that blank for now, and then we can add those colors later. So let's add the skin tones to all of these figures. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to start forming the petals on my ranunculus. And I have my iPad here with some photos of, these flowers. And you're always welcome to print out or have something on your phone or your iPad so you have your own visual references. So I'm going to set this aside and I'm going to reference that photo for my colors. So I have picked up some quinacridone magenta, which I'm going to bring down. I don't really worry so much if my palette's a little dirty. I think it muddies the color up a little bit in a way that gives it character. So I actually never wash the mixing area of my palette because I think that those colors give my mixed colors a lot more, like I said, character and more interest. I've picked up a little bit of Opera Rose. I'm going to add that in here just to give it a little bit more brightness. And what I'm going to do is I'm starting at the waist of my figure. I'm going to start creating these C curves very lightly with the tip of my brush and having them wrap around the figure. So this is kind of like the technique that you would use in a rose. And I have a video all about flowers and how to create a basic ranunculus. So if you're interested in more detail about that, I would check that video out, which I'll link in the card above. So basically though, what I'm doing is I'm creating these very light swishes or brush strokes that are all wrapping around that main figure, avoiding the body, because I want to have full control over what color I'm going to use for the midsection and that bodice area of my dancer. So as the brush strokes emanate outwards, they're going to get thicker and thicker. So the lightest brush strokes will be closest to the waist. And as you progress outwardly towards the outer edges of our circle that we drew with a pencil, then they're going to get thicker and you can use more of the belly of the brush and pressing down with that to create these larger brush strokes. Also notice that as I get to the edge, the actual paint itself gets a little bit more diluted. So I like my ranunculus to be very bold and saturated closer to the center, and that gives it the effect of it being bundled and tight and more three-dimensional. So you go in with a more saturated version of that color in the center, and as you get closer to the edges, then you can allow that paint to become more watered down and more transparent, and that'll give it a really beautiful painterly effect. So I'm pretty happy with this. I'm just adding a couple of little extra touches here and there to allow the paint to bleed. And, this is really at your discretion if you wanted to have more gradated effects, or maybe I think it's also really nice to have a couple of tiny little wispy ends on the outer border of your flower, just because it makes it look a little bit more three-dimensional. So now that we have that, what I'm going to do for the other flowers is I'm going to use exactly the same technique. However, I'm going to be using other colors on my palette that are analogous and mixing that with my magenta. And if you don't know what analogous colors are, in a nutshell, it's essentially colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. I have a whole video dedicated to this and color theory in general, so I would really recommend checking that out if you're interested in learning more about how to create very harmonious color palettes. So with that said, let's keep going and fill in the rest of these flower buds and the petals and just make them as beautiful and as colorful as possible using an analogous color palette. And the key artists to retain visual unity when you're using a lot of different colors on one piece is that I always recommend mixing the same colors and using the same colors throughout the entire painting. So I'm bringing some orange touches to the pink areas of my painting. I'm adding pink accents to the orange areas of my painting, creating what I call like an ecosystem of the same colors throughout the whole painting will make the whole thing look a lot more unified and a lot more professional. So think about that when you're creating your painting and trying to incorporate the same colors that you're using on some areas into other areas of your painting as well. And that'll really pay off in the end, I promise you. So I think we're in good shape now with these flowers. I think they look really beautiful. So I'm going to add some stems now using some sap green with, you guessed it, a little bit of pink and orange mixed into it. So again, I'm mixing in those colors from the whole painting to build in that visual unity. And you really can't tell that this green has been modified a little bit, but it gives it that warmer tone that's going to blend in and work a lot better with these other colors that I have going on. So I've added maybe a bit too much pink to the stem because it's looking way too electric. So I'm going to take some more green and just mix it straight onto my paper and dull that pink a little bit more. But you can see how even with that pink being there, it doesn't really bother me too much because it just gives the painting more dimension. It's more interesting as well than a flat green straight out of the tube. So for those stems, they were basically just S curves. So you're using the tip of your brush for those. And for the leaves, we can use more of the belly of the brush, creating some irregular shapes. And these don't have to be super realistic, but I would just use your reference image for guidance, just keeping it simple. I have a couple of little brush strokes that are all next to each other that give it the illusion of it being a leaf-like shape. But I wouldn't worry too much about trying to overwork these leaves. I mean, the whole point is for it to be very free and a little bit looser. So you're not really worrying about, getting all the different veins in for the leaves and trying to make it super realistic. Just a couple of brush strokes for each of these leaves should be just fine. So now we can move on to some more details, and I've switched to a smaller number 2 brush for these details, and I've mixed together some sienna with some magenta and some of the oranges, like I mentioned before, mixing the other colors in this palette. And I'm going to be doing the hair for this one figure. So right above, I've created a very sweeping arch brush stroke, and right where the head and the neck meet, I have added a little ball, which is going to be for a low bun. And I'm going to repeat this for all of my dancers and maybe vary the tones and the values that I'm doing for the hair so that it looks like, you've got a couple of different hair colors going on. But essentially, it's going to be the same for all of these dancers, where you've got that arch at the top for the hairline and then a little ball for where the bun is at the base of the neck. So for this dancer on the top left corner, I want her hair to be a little bit lighter and more of like a dark blonde. So what I did is I took a bit of orange and mixed that into the same color that I was using for the other brunettes. And using some different colors is going to give you some variations, so we're not just, all uniform in terms of everybody's hair color. So I'm going to wash my brush right now, and we're going to work on the bodice or the clothes, the main, torso area of these different dancers. And I think I realized that I actually really like them being white because it gives it some contrast and a break from the color. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to outline it and outline the bust line, which I'm going to make a heart shape because I just like the way that looks. But you do you, you figure out what you like best. And if you want them to have sleeves or if you want them to look a little bit different, then you could do that as well. I'm just going to add some dot detailing on the torso to give it the effect of, it not just being one big white block in the middle. I'm going to give it some detailing so it looks like these are actual costumes, or there's a little bit more visual interest going on the torso area of these figures. That's looking pretty good, so I'm going to switch gears now and move to a smaller sized brush. I recommend a 12/0, 10/0, just basically a smaller round brush with a sharp tip. And I typically recommend going from larger sized brushes at the beginning and working your way to smaller and smaller as you go, so that way you can really keep the gestural and more artistic kind of feel of a larger brush when you're doing your beginning stages of your washes, and get tighter and tighter as you go. go. So a common mistake I see beginners and a lot of artists make is reaching for a small brush from the get-go and starting off their painting with really, really tight brush strokes and being too detailed. When in fact, I think it's really helpful to start off with larger brushes so you have that expressive quality to your painting, and you can always get more detailed and, do the fine needlework, if you will, as you get closer to the end stages of your painting. I think that this brush is actually really perfect for creating these really intricate, details. Like I'm going to add crowns or head pieces onto these figures, just to give it that little magical touch. I think it would be really nice for them to have these little head pieces. And I'm using the same colors that I did for the flowers themselves. So anywhere from opera pink to oranges, things that complement the overall color scheme that we're going with here. And in a little bit, I'm going to add some metallics to this, but for the time being, I'm going to create sort of like an underpainting of these pinks and oranges before I add my very magical metallic accents on top. Coming in back to the flower and just adding a little bit more depth to the center part of the flower. You can, either do this or not, depending on how yours turned out. But I noticed that I want a little bit more contrast on the center of my flowers just to make it more dimensional and give it more pop. So now we're going to move on to the facial features, which I intentionally keep simple just to avoid any headaches, and stress as well. So right here, I'm going to create 2 upside down U shapes. So they're going to be kind of elongated U's, and that's going to be for eyelids / eyelashes. And then I'm going to do this basically for all of my figures, and that's really going to be the extent of what the eyes are like. Is these these U shapes, which you sometimes see on Japanese. I realized that the other day that I noticed that that's kind of what you see on Japanese anime characters. It's kind of a very stylized way of doing eyes, which I think is fun and expressive and whimsical. And, you don't have to be all realistic necessarily with all of your details, which I, never abide by. In any case, the point of this painting is really not the meticulous details of the face. It really is just that overall impression of these very out of this world, whimsical dancing flowers. And to me, I think that part of the beauty in art is figuring out where you want to draw your viewer's eye to. So, maybe it is the details for some people, but for me, I want to draw my viewer's eye to the fact that this is a very fairy tale, very whimsical, out of this world kind of scene going on with these dancers popping out of these flowers. And I don't really want them to spend that much time on the details. I want them to really, or I want you guys to, just take in the overall feeling of this dreamlike moment as opposed to those tiny details, but that's me. So figure out what works for you and what you want your painting to look like and what your intention is, and focus on that and see how you can draw your viewer to what it is you want them to take away from your painting. And to me, it's kind of like a smoke and mirrors magician's trick, where unlike the real world, we get to control as artists exactly how and where we want to put emphasis on our painting. So I think that's what makes us so different from photographers or the real world is we have that control, which I just love. So take advantage of that, you guys. And speaking of emphasis and, controlling things on your painting, one thing that, we have a lot of control over is composition. So right now I'm noticing that the 3 ranunculus flowers in the middle are quite heavy. So I want to add some more buds around them in the negative space that I'm seeing to fill that in and give it some more life and make it a bit more organic so that we're not looking at 3 large lollipops sort of dancing around in the middle of the page. So giving a couple more of these smaller buds around where I see negative space will help give it a more organic, bouquet-like feeling. And again, here, this is sort of at your discretion. Wherever you see that there's negative space that might look like it might need to be filled or to balance things out, you could add a little bud here or there, following the same techniques that we used for the main flowers, but just shrinking them down a bit so they're smaller and not competing for attention with the main flowers. Now I'm going to bring a stem down for each of these, and this is going to be with the same color that we mixed for the rest of the stems, and just adding, those those little stems wherever they need to attach to those little buds that we created. So let's just speed through these and, fill out this negative space and create more balance to this bouquet so it looks a little fuller. So now that we're wrapping this up, I'm going to add some metallic accents to this painting. And this is going to be my secret concoction of Schminke Aqua Bronze Powder. This is some pretty pricey powder, but I think you don't need to use very much of it, so it goes a long, long way. And I'm going to mix it with an equal part of golden fluid acrylic in iridescent gold deep. Fine. So this is my secret to these beautiful, very shiny metallics that look like they've come out of a gold leaf or something. So a lot of people comment that, my artwork, especially in person, looks like, I used gold leaf in it. And actually, I just use this incredible mixture of these two, and it yields some amazing results. And one of my favorite things about it, too, is that you can water it down. And when you do, it creates these very granular, nearly transparent versions of gold, and the camera's barely picking it up. But what's amazing is when you pick up your artwork afterwards and you lift it up to the sun, it kind of shines, but in a way that's not in your face. It's very subtle and has that very magical quality that I look for. It's also buildable, so depending on how much water you use, you could either have it be very transparent or super opaque and very shiny. So I'm reserving the transparent kind of granular touches for the petals, and I'm going to come in and add some much shinier and more metallic, more obviously metallic accents to certain areas, because I don't want to go overkill on this. It's really a balance between, where to push and where to pull back so that the whole thing isn't like a shiny mess. It's really just adding just the right touches to make it balanced. Now that I have my transparent versions down, I'm going to add the stronger and more opaque metallic shiny golds, which everybody loves. So here I'm going to just add dots where I, see fit. So that is in the bodice as well as in the, the headpieces. So that's really going to shine and pop and really have that bejeweled kind of look that I'm going for. So again, here, very, very sparing with this so that it doesn't end up being, way too much. And at this point, I'm just gonna, go in at my own discretion, figuring out where I want to add these little touches so that it looks nice and balanced. It might be on the petals on some areas, it might be on the leaves on others. And I like to think about it as where the light is hitting and reflecting off the flowers. So, some areas might be darker because they're in the shadows, and some areas are really hitting the light if you've got direct sunlight coming onto these flowers. So as always, when we're done with our work, I always like to sign everything I do. So add your signature, and we are done with this marvelous bouquet of ranunculus dancers. So there you go, beautiful and delicate ranunculus flower dancers. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so that you can let YouTube know that you're enjoying this channel, and to help me with creating more videos and more tutorials just like this one. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching and joining me every week, and I'll see you next time.